I am today announcing my candidacy for the presidency of the United States.
The most important words of my life.
I'm here tonight.
I stand
before you today
to declare that I am a candidate
for President of the United States.
I am running
for President of the United States.
I officially announce my candidacy
for President of the United States.
I'm running for president.
I am officially running
for President of the United States.
From the University of Virginia Center for Politics, this is Sabato's Crystal Ball, America Votes.
Welcome to our fourth edition of the new video Crystal Ball. We have it every Thursday at 2 p.m., but we have other ways to view it too, and you'll hear about that in just a moment. An awful lot is going on, even as we tape this for today. We have also new maps for the U.S. Senate and for the Electoral College. So without further ado, let me turn this over to the managing editor of the Crystal Ball, Kyle Condon. Kyle, take it away.
Thanks, Larry. And we're also going to be joined today by our third member of our Crystal Ball team, Associate Editor Miles Coleman. So it is Thursday, September 10th. We are now past Labor Day, which means that we're in the, traditional campaign season, although, of course, American politics, it basically never stops and it never starts. It's just a continuous thing. But before we start, we just want to say that we're pleased to partner with Lifetime Learning in UVA Office of Engagement for today's edition. We're also doing this in conjunction with the More Than the Score program at UVA, which Professor Sabato has been a part of for all 14 years it's existed. Usually it's a presentation in the morning before a football game. And so we're pleased to help kick off that their More Than a Score program in addition to our usual audience here. And if this is your first time viewing the program, if you're coming in for More Than the Score, make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel, UVA CFP. Just hit that subscribe button. We're also working to make this available as a podcast. I'm told that we're fairly close on it appearing on Apple Podcasts and other platforms, so we will keep you all updated about that. And also, if you're on our YouTube channel, we had two different programs yesterday that you could watch there if you missed them. We had a panel on the state of democracy around the world, and also a session with Dorothy Shea, who is the U.S. ambassador to Lebanon. So if you didn't see those, you can watch them on YouTube. Any of you in Central Virginia, we invite you to tune into VPM next Tuesday night at 8 p.m. It's for the second installment of our three-part Dismantling Democracy documentary series. And we'll have information soon for folks outside Central Virginia as to how you might be able to see that program. And finally, if you'd like to support this broadcast and other work at the UVA Center for Politics, just text USA Votes to 41444 to receive additional instructions. Again, USA Votes to 41444. We're grateful that a number of you have taken advantage of this, and your support is we really value, and it's important to the work we do at the Center for Politics. So we thank you all for that. So with that, let's get into the program. First of all, Larry, what would it be? Would it be an election season without a new bombshell from Bob Woodward, which I guess is the talk of the politics this week? And so I have a question from Jeff Smith of Rochester Hills, Michigan, and that is, how do you assess the impact of the Bob Woodward book, Revelations, on the race for the presidency and the Senate?
Well, given the fact that almost nothing seems to change the numbers very much, all the controversies, even in the last month or so, don't appear to have moved the needle very much either for Trump or for Biden. I guess that I would suggest that probably this won't change the needle either. We already know that the hardcore 40, 41, 42% that he has in his base will stick with him through thick and thin, or some would say through truth and lies. They're not going to move. They'll find a million reasons why Trump didn't mean what he said, or it was misreported by the fake news, and on and on. I'm at the point where I think nothing really matters other than party ID, partisan ID in this polarized age, and one's political orientation, ideological and otherwise. On this election and with this president in particular, almost everyone knows how they're going to vote, and they're going to follow through. So it's interesting to watch the campaign. Maybe something so big will happen that it will turn things around, but that's my guess. I'm sure it's an interesting book, and Bob has lots of revelations, as he always does. But affecting people is another thing. Who's going to buy this book? 90+% will be people who don't like Trump, maybe 99%. So they're just reinforcing their beliefs.
The same people that made Mary Trump's book, I think, sold like 1 million copies or something. And I don't know if those are necessarily persuadable voters.
Exactly.
And it is really striking that if you go back and look at what the numbers look like right before the pandemic on March 1st in the national polls and whatnot, and then you look and Trump's approval, and you look at them now, they're a little worse, but it's not that much different. And we've had this horrible year in the U.S. and yet, gone from peace and prosperity to kind of a lot of challenges, and hasn't changed politics all that much, which just shows how just a real lack of persuadable voters, as I think you said, Larry. One other question that we meant to get to last week, and is really an important topic that I'm sure we'll have more on as we move along here. But we've got a couple of questions about some of the protests and violence in places like Kenosha and Portland. And so Peter Bradley asked, historically, violence like in Kenosha, Wisconsin, has helped so-called law and order candidates. Do you believe this will continue to be true, or is the attitude and awareness of voters significantly different now? And also from Kate Arnold from UVA, just wondering how much the protests that have a violent element are hurting the Democrats. Larry, what do you think about that so far?
I'll give you a two-part answer. Part one is that the polls suggest that it's not having much effect, even in states like Wisconsin, which are ground zero for riots and racial protests and so on. Oregon is probably so democratically tilted that it won't make much difference there. So that's what the polls are saying. Being older, I not only remember 1968, we've discussed that already. Nixon was not the incumbent and the electorate was much more white in 1968. But the law and order issue had a big impact for Nixon, second only to Vietnam. But I'm thinking of the socially desirable responses that polled individuals give on racial questions. It's not an accident that in many cases, not all cases, Obama being an example, but in many cases, Tom Bradley running for governor of California back in 1982, Doug Wilder running for governor of Virginia in 1989. Bradley lost a race that all the polls said he was going to win. Wilder was supposed to win by a massive landslide, according to the Washington Post polls and others, and he won in a squeaker, about 6,000 votes out of 1.8 million. And there have been other examples since. What people say to a pollster, or even at work among their associates, wherever, other places, that could be very different than what they do in the voting booth or sitting at a table filling out their absentee ballot. So I'm keeping an open mind on that. I think it might have an effect, and the latest poll out of Wisconsin has it closer than it has been. Biden up by 4 points, but below 50. So we'll see. I think it's going to have some effect. How much of an effect depends on events that haven't happened. Will things calm down? I mean, Portland's setting records every day. I think it's been 104 days of constant protest. Kenosha, much shorter time span, and that's true for most of the other places. But you can never tell about this. And one thing's for sure, it can't help Democrats. I don't know how much it's hurting them, but it can't help them.
Well, and I hate to say this too, but it's probably a fact of life that because there are racial inequities in policing, and also that this has become such a sort of an activated issue that there's probably going to be another flashpoint at some point between now and the election. I mean, that's a I don't know if you call that a September surprise or an October surprise or something like that, but this is probably going to come up again, and one just wonders if there'll be some sort of impact. So over the last few days, we've released new assessments of the Electoral College and the U.S. Senate. We're going to get into those assessments in some detail. Question that I'll direct this to Miles and Larry. feel free to chime in too. I was talking about, maybe not all that much has changed lately, but, now we're past the conventions, we're past Labor Day. Do we see any sort of like lingering effects, do you think, Miles, from the conventions or just changes in the race?
Overall, I think the effect was probably blunted some just because something like 92 to 95% of people on either side, have their minds already made up. In fact, I know Larry just mentioned that poll out of Wisconsin from Marquette yesterday, and one of the observations from Charles Franklin, who runs a poll, is like, okay, well, in our polling, we really haven't found a significant convention bump for either their side. It's like, yeah, okay, well, Biden's lead had narrowed some, but it's still, he's still up by a few points, and it's within the margin of error from like their last poll. So I'm just of the mind that people's minds are so made up already.
Yeah. Larry, any thought on that?
Well, these were very different conventions. They were virtual, and a lot of the energy was drained out of them. And every 4 years, we have more programs, more channels, more streaming, counter programming the conventions. So I would suspect that the number will decline over time. It declined this year compared to 4 years ago, the number of people watching. That affects things too. But as Miles suggested, 90+% know exactly who they're going to vote for. People are fooling themselves if they think otherwise. Almost nothing will move them from one category to another. And the undecided vote, I think, is single digits, and I would argue for low single digits. Other people say mid single digits, maybe 7-8%. I don't believe it. I think it's more like 3, 4, 5, and half of them won't vote.
Yeah, sometimes undecided, their decision is they don't show up. It's undecided, not just between the candidates, but whether they decide to vote or not. I think you could sort of piece together that, we didn't even get enough data, I think, from the Democratic convention because it was right back to back with the RNC that, I don't think Biden got any bounce. It might have been that you saw like a little bit of an RNC bounce, although it may be wearing off a little bit. I did hear from some Republican contacts they felt like maybe things got a little better for them in the Midwest following the convention, but I don't know if you could really point to all the publicly available data and really make any great sort of observation about that. So we'll get to our ratings in a second on our various scenarios and maps, but we in today's piece on the Electoral College, and Larry, you wrote this part of it about just the Electoral College in general and how we're sort of stuck with it. And we did a question from Lois Welch from Charlottesville. How do you see the role of the Electoral College, and do you think it should be disbanded?
Well, I'm not going to get into that discussion because it would take this hour and the rest of the day just to cover the reform proposals that are out there. I've dabbled in that myself. I wrote a book called A More Perfect Constitution with 23 changes that I was promoting for the Constitution, more as a classroom discussion stimulus than a belief that anything would actually happen. And I certainly have been confirmed in that belief. We're not going to have very many constitutional amendments for the foreseeable future because we're so polarized. And the founders wrote the provision there, actually 2 provisions, but the provision we use makes it very difficult to get constitutional amendments passed because you need an overwhelming majority of the country really behind something. And even then, it may not go through. So we're stuck with the Electoral College, not just for this November, but for some time to come. But the discussion is fun, but it's irrelevant to this November. So I would say here's the big difference, and it's something I've been thinking about lately in looking at old maps. This is what old people do. They look at old maps to remind them of the way things were, certainly when I started back in 1892.
Hey, we younger people look at maps too. I know.
Yeah, that's what I do all the time.
Oh, young people do? Oh, okay. Well, I didn't know that. We never talk about those things except 40 times a day. But in any event, looking back, what's interesting is that the small states, and we've always had lightly populated states, usually a majority of states were lightly populated. For the vast majority of American history, they've been split. they've been split between the two major parties, say since 1860 or 1880, just to give the Reconstruction time to wear off. Loads of those small states voted Democratic, loads of the small states voted Republican. So there wasn't a collective impact of their additional electoral votes, the 2 senatorial votes that each state gets. California gets 2, Wyoming gets 2, Rhode Island gets 2. And also the fact that every state gets at least 1 electoral vote, even if they don't have the population. Well, look at your map. There are still a few small states that vote Democratic, but a large majority of them vote Republican. And it's had an impact. It's reduced the chances of a constitutional amendment, reduced the chances of other reforms coming into play that may not require constitutional amendment. So this is why the Electoral College today favors Republicans. It makes up for 2 or 3% of the popular vote, as you saw in 2016, and to a lesser extent back in the Bush-Gore race in 2000. We're going to have more of those elections. You can lose the popular vote if you're a Republican and still win the Electoral College, in some cases handily, as Trump did in 2016. So our new electoral map isn't that much changed from the older one, because we weren't responding simply to the summer polls, which were kind of ridiculous in many cases. The Quinnipiac poll in Florida that had Biden up 13%. We all had a good chuckle about that. And to their credit, their latest poll has Biden up, I think, by just 3, something like that. And there have been other Florida polls that show it very close or tied. That's Florida, okay? And if it's a tie, it really is tied, just put it in the Republican camp. Go ahead and put it in the Republican camp, because Republicans are better at getting out their votes and doing the right things in campaign terms than Democrats are. And they've proven it over and over and over again in recent elections. So if it is 48-48, as Marist NBC said, put it in the Republican camp. But we don't know if it's tied yet. This is early September, and the voting starts heavily toward the 20th or so of October, all the way through to November 3rd. What should we? I'm gonna let you all take Nebraska 2. We changed Nebraska 2. We still have Arizona, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Florida as the 4 toss-up states. We think all the others are leaning, some narrowly. We may change some of the leans, but right now we're comfortable with those 65 electoral votes in those 4 states, which we think will make the difference in the election. And you can argue forever about how they really lean, and it really doesn't matter, because we're a long way from the bulk of the voting.
Jason, talking to our great producer, Jason here, if you haven't brought up the electoral map yet, please do as our first map. And yeah, the one change we made today is we moved Nebraska's 2nd congressional district. Remember that Maine and Nebraska both cast their electoral votes via congressional district. And so those states can split. So in 2008, for instance, Barack Obama won the single electoral vote in Nebraska's 2nd district. Likewise, in 2016, Donald Trump won a single electoral vote in Maine's 2nd district. And so we moved Nebraska 2 from toss-up to leans Democratic today. That put Biden 269, at least leaning to him, Trump at least 204 leaning to him, and then 65 toss-ups. Miles, why did we move Nebraska 2 to leans Democratic today?
Yeah, so we kind of mentioned in the article that a big, one of the big indicators, especially in the Trump era, has been educational attainment. And in Nebraska, too, something like 41% of residents there who were 25 years and older have a college degree. And that 41% is higher than every state except for Massachusetts. We're not saying it's going to vote as blue as Massachusetts, but we're saying that's an important indicator. And maybe another point on this as well is you were just talking about how both Maine and Nebraska split their allocate their electoral votes by congressional district. They're the only states who did do it. Well, this could, if it goes by what we're predicting, this could be the first election where they both split their votes, and which is really it's really definitely shows the polarization, because just like at the statewide level, Maine and Nebraska aren't the most competitive states, but they're not immune to national trends either. It was in 2016, Trump was able to get that electoral vote out of Maine too, because it's more rural. It's pretty monolithically white. It's very working class. Basically, the type of constituency he had a big appeal to. So the same factors are kind of working the other way in favor of Biden in Nebraska too. Okay, it's more educated. It has a slightly growing minority population. So it's just that these. I think it shows that these, even in some of these states that we don't really think is competitive, there's a lot of movement within the individual congressional districts themselves.
It does open up some interesting electoral avenues in that. So we've got Biden at 269 with this Nebraska 2nd congressional district. If he were to win Maine 2, that would be exactly 270. However, it's 269 all tie, which a lot of people like to talk about, but probably isn't going to happen. But if that did happen, the House of Representatives would have to break the tie. And even though the Democrats control the majority in the House and probably in the new House too, every state delegation gets a vote, and the Republicans have more state delegations than Democrats do narrowly. So that's something that's just on the horizon that gets talked about a lot. And depending on how close this race gets, it may be something that we really have to focus on. One thing we did in the crystal ball today too is we came up with some different scenarios. Like what would a good Trump map look like? What would a good Biden map look like? And so let's go to the good Trump map, which is his hypothetical victory for him. One of the things we note is that if a president gets reelected, and Obama was really the only post-Civil War exception to this, if a president gets reelected, that person almost always wins a state that he didn't win last time. And so in addition to Trump sort of holding on to much of this Midwestern gains in this map, we also flagged one state that maybe Trump could win this time they didn't last time. And Miles, maybe you could talk about Nevada just briefly.
Yeah, sure. So the Trump campaign will talk about some Clinton states that they think they can flip. Often they'll mention Minnesota or New Hampshire, kind of like I was talking about with Nebraska too. Both of those are relatively educated states. They mention New Mexico a lot, which Clinton won that state by 8 points. That's kind of a steep climb. But Nevada was a state that Clinton only won by about 2.5. Even though it's a light blue state, usually it has much more of a working class feel. Most of the Democratic-based voters there work in the tourism or culinary industries in Las Vegas. So it's a more working class state, and it's famous for, in terms of one of the reasons why Democrats have done so well there over the past decade or so is what they call the Reid machine, which is basically when former Senator Harry Reid was in office, he really built this really vaunted turnout operation that the Democrats have in that state. Well, with the pandemic, it's changing. There's some evidence that the Reid machine may struggle to adapt in terms of registering voters, getting the vote by mail out. So we see that as somewhat of an X factor. We're not saying it's necessarily going to be enough to throw the election to Trump, but it's in a good night for him. It wouldn't necessarily be an unrealistic target.
Yeah, and otherwise, Larry, the sort of the map for Trump is pretty much the same as it was last time. It's like Upper Midwest, Florida, North Carolina. We're not really seeing him, I think, break a ton of new ground here. Although maybe a state like Nevada or Minnesota might be a possibility.
Yeah, you certainly want to keep an open mind on these other states, but really, I would say early on things can change before the bulk of the voting starts. But right now, everything seems to be converging pretty much as the 2016 map, with several states that were very close the last time in contention, meaning, of course, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Florida, the ones that you would expect. And North Carolina, to some degree. We'll see how that's going. It's more fundamentally Republican than Democratic, that's for sure. Despite the governor, I know the governor will win handily, the Democratic governor, but that doesn't necessarily do anything for Joe Biden. So this is going to be fascinating, and yet because people are so dug in on their choice, I would be surprised if the map looked very different at all from 2016, with the exception of the states that I've just mentioned.
So let's go to, we sort of painted what sort of a rosy picture for Trump, which was a 295 to 243. So a little worse than 2016. Maybe Biden carries Michigan and Trump carries Nevada, and that's basically the only changes. Let's go to what like a good Biden map looks like, and this is this would be Biden reassembling the old quote blue wall in the upper in the industrial north, winning Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Arizona, I think, is right there for the taking for Biden. Biden generally leads polls there. Democrats also appear to lead the Senate race in that state by probably kind of mid-single digits. And then you'd look at states like Florida and North Carolina as targeted ones last time. So on this hypothetical map, you got Biden at 350, you got Trump at 188. You have Biden winning all the Clinton states, plus sort of the six sort of core swing states that we're all focused on: Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania in the industrial north, Arizona, Florida, and North Carolina in the Sun Belt. And then I guess the sort of the surprise on this good Biden map is that we have Georgia also voting Democratic. And our understanding is that race is very close there. And in fact, Georgia, Iowa, Ohio, Texas, we still favor Trump in all those states to some degree. But, if Biden has a good night, all those states could go blue. I mean, it's not that crazy to suggest something like that happening. Again, we're not quite there yet. But you notice that, the good Trump map is kind of another sort of inside straight. He kind of ekes it out again and probably loses the popular vote in doing so. Whereas, there's a world in which Biden kind of, wins by 7-8 points nationally, and the close states kind of all go to him. And that would be a fairly sizable victory. So that, I think there are a number of different alternatives that are on the table here. And again, we sketched some of these out in a crystal ball.
And then I know, I just want to say quickly as well, I know earlier in the program, Larry was talking again about, a lot or much of the Republican strength in the Electoral College is built off of these smaller states. They're going to win a lot of the smaller states, but what I wanted to point out was Biden, basically we see Biden as having a higher ceiling than Trump because, he would win most of those larger states.
And then the question is really Texas and Florida. Those are the kind of big size states that Republicans still win consistently. And, Florida's close. And I mean, Texas is close too. That's where go ahead.
We'll believe it, Kyle, when we see it. They're not Florida. It can go either way. I'm a bit suspicious that Democrats will be able to pull it off unless Biden is winning really handily nationally. Then he might win by a point or two in Florida. Texas, I really will believe it only when I see it. Close counts in horseshoes. It doesn't count with the Electoral College. So as Beto O'Rourke can tell you, it's great to get within 2.5 points of Ted Cruz, but Ted Cruz is voting in the Senate, and Beto O'Rourke, I don't know what he's doing, but he's certainly not in the Senate.
He was rewarded with a very nondescript presidential campaign.
Yes, that took a little time, but He's no doubt preparing to run for something else eventually, or maybe he'll be in the cabinet. I don't know if Biden is elected. But, you know, it's awfully tough to break the pattern. Occasionally it happens. It happened in 2008 on the Democratic side in Colorado and Virginia because of Obama's candidacy. It happened for the Republicans in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin because of Trump's candidacy. So it can happen, but we're talking about, you know, at most a couple states, maybe three, and I'll be surprised if it's that many. So Texas, you know, you got to prove it to us, and otherwise don't mess with Texas. That's my advice. I've heard that someplace.
You know, and one thing too that I think that sort of the good Biden map kind of illustrates is that there's sort of like, we talk about kind of like a kind of a Rust Belt path for the Democrats and sort of a Sun Belt path. And the good Biden map that we've come up with him at 350, it sort of has both of those, you know, inroads in the Sun Belt and, you know, Georgia and Arizona and Florida, and also restoring some of the old Democratic majorities in the Midwest, but not all of them. You know, we still have Iowa and Ohio as red on these maps. Those states both voted for Obama twice. You know, so this might represent kind of a blend of both the Democratic past and the Democratic future. And, you know, you saw that when Obama first got elected, 2008, you know, he won a lot of the places Bill Clinton won, but Clinton also carried like Louisiana and Arkansas and Kentucky and West Virginia, and those states are now like blood red states. So it's, you know, it kind of, these maps sort of, they evolve over time, and the things that we think of as being safe one way or safe the other way now, you know, maybe that changes. Let's touch on.
I remember I was watching. Just one quick note on that is I've mentioned this on Twitter a few times. I was going back and rewatching some election footage from 2000, and it was Larry King was interviewing as the elections were coming in. The host he was, or the guest he was having on was Ann Richards, and when West Virginia came in, he asked her, okay, well, how do you explain away West Virginia? That's a state that no Democrat should lose. You know, that's just in today's context, it seems like, wow, you know, it just, so, you know, that's got me thinking, okay, well, what in a realistic scenario, you know, what could maybe be a West Virginia for Biden? Okay, could it be in Arizona where they've said that's trending, you know, their way for a while? Some people say it's Georgia or Texas. So that's something I'm really looking out for this year.
See, Larry, not only does Miles look at old election maps, he looks at old television coverage too.
That's good, because that's really when I had my heyday. Thank you, Miles. I appreciate it. By the way, just yesterday, I did an interview with Larry King. He looks the same. He's got the same energy. He's out on the West Coast. He's 86, but then some of us are pushing 70. So I get it. I understand it. But Larry's doing well. And for those of you who remember him at CNN, Larry King Live played a big role politically. 1992, Ross Perot launched his candidacy on Larry King. It was you could do a book just on his show. But anyway, back to the current year. What year is it again? No, I'm sorry.
2020, I think. Yeah. It all blends together. Let's talk just briefly about the Senate. And so let's go to that map that has our current U.S. Senate ratings. And, you know, I was sort of thinking, you know, we had sort of planned out that we were going to make some, that we really wanted to take stock of things after the conventions and after Labor Day, which I think we've devoted this week toward. And I was thinking there might be some sort of big movement in the Senate. And boy, in talking to people on both sides of the races, I really think the map looks a lot like it has all summer. You know, you've got Republicans favoring Alabama, you've got Democrats favoring Colorado and Arizona, and then you've got North Carolina and Maine and Iowa as still like very legitimate toss-ups. You know, Democrats are in the game in places like Montana and Georgia. But I mean, I still think the Senate is very much up for grabs. I mean, Larry, what do you think?
I agree with that. I've seen so many projections with Democrats getting up to 53, 54 seats. I don't see it. Again, maybe there's a massive Biden landslide coming. I don't think we're in the age where landslides are really possible, but I'm ready to be disproven on November 3rd or whenever, December or whenever we stop counting votes. So, I just doubt it. As you look at the races, it's true that a lot of the close ones go in the same direction. They go in the direction of the national drift, whatever that is. So that could build up a Democratic lead. But if you're looking at the races more individually and thinking about which candidate will carry them presidentially and whether a candidate down ballot can overcome the loss of his or her presidential candidate, you keep coming back to 50-50 or 51-49. Now that has Democrats gaining net 3 or net 4, and who knows, that may prove too optimistic, but I think 50-50 is reasonable. And of course, if the Democrats win the presidency, then Vice President Kamala Harris would be breaking the ties in the Senate. That's where it is now. Who knows what's going to happen? Scandals come out of nowhere, though. We're in the age of scandals, and there's so many of them, they no longer affect politics. So we'll have to see. It's early. It's fun. Don't close your mind to other alternatives this early. Keep an open mind. How many things have happened this year that you and I and Kyle and Miles and everybody else could not have imagined? It's a long list. It's not just the pandemic. It's a long list. So we've got, the better part of 2 months to go. Keep your mind open.
So just real quick, we did a couple Senate scenarios too, just to sort of illustrate, good night for both sides. So let's go to the next map here, which is what we described as the good Republican night. And basically that would be like status quo. Alabama flips to the Republicans, Colorado flips to the Democrats, and that's it. And really what this map actually would do is I'm sure you've heard us mention before that, in 2016, that was the first time that every Senate race in the era of popular elections voted the same way for president, for Senate. This would be a map where, Trump would be carrying Republican Senate incumbents like Martha McSally and Tom Tillis in North Carolina, Joni Ernst in Iowa over the finish line. And this would also be a map where probably you'd only have one state voting differently for president, for Senate, and that would be Maine. You'd have Susan Collins hanging on to her Senate seat and the state voting Democratic for president. So, there's a world in which we go through all of this and there's not much net change in the Senate. It's actually kind of how it was in the last presidential election, where Democrats netted just 2 seats. And went from 54 Republicans to 52 Republicans. And, that was another year where there were a lot of races in play and Republicans ended up holding most of them. And then if we go to the final image here, which is a good night for Democrats in the Senate, this is where you see them sort of breaking open and getting certainly over 50 seats. And one thing to watch is that, Georgia's very close for both Senate races. We know the special election is going to go to a runoff because it's an all-party primary in November. No one's going to get over 50%. And that runoff is January 5th. And actually the Congress opens on January 4th. So there's going to be at least one vacancy in the Senate on that, or there's going to be one race undetermined, not necessarily a vacancy. And then the other Georgia Senate race might go to runoff too. So you could have 2 runoffs at the same time in Georgia. But, this map shows Democrats winning sort of those core 4 races: Colorado, Arizona, Maine, and North Carolina. Democrats winning Iowa and Montana as well, which is certainly plausible. And then you'd have those, and then you have sort of a surprise. One of these states that you don't expect an upset maybe comes through, and South Carolina is one we've heard a lot about. So that's that general kind of Senate feel. And again, just like with the Electoral College, I think there's still a pretty wide range of outcomes here with the Senate. Any final thoughts, either Miles or Larry, on where we are in the Senate right now?
Well, I would just add, it's not. I would add, you were talking about those 2 Senate races in Georgia that potentially both could go to a runoff, and there's some chance that they could decide the majority as well. Which probably wouldn't bode well for Democrats, considering how they've done in some recent Georgia runoffs like that. But if the majority is at stake, we're probably going to see in January of next year, we could definitely see a super kind of nationalized race in Georgia. So we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, 2 Senate races on the same day with a runoff. I mean, that would generate a lot of turnout, I would think. But Larry, I'm
that's presidential. Oh, you mean the runoff?
I mean, the runoff, but it's one thing if there's one seat. If there's 2, I mean, that's it's not quite a presidential race, but it's close to one.
I would just add a final note as we close, which we're doing right now. I'm on Twitter. I don't know. I try to go on once every couple of hours for a few minutes. Sometimes it sucks me in, and I end up doing more Twitter than writing, which is a really bad thing if you're an academic. But in any event, I love a lot of the people on Twitter. We got election Twitter, and I give Miles credit for introducing them to us and us to them in a lot of respects, and loads of other people who are interested in politics. And a fair number of the tweets I get are very reasonable and thoughtful, and people are adding things that make a difference. And we appreciate all of that. It makes a difference for us. But I get a lot of tweets saying something like a version of, why are you even talking about that? This is over. So-and-so will win, handily. It's going to be a landslide. Now, look, everybody's entitled to their opinion, but don't shut down the conversation, even for yourself. You can miss a lot of things that are happening. And on election night or election month or whatever it is, you don't want to be sitting there scratching your head saying, how could this have happened? The more you listen, the more you learn, the more people who play a role in this, the better, because it's about our involvement. It's about the politicians for sure and their staffs and American democracy, but it's about all of us participating in this process. And a lot of the participation is debate and discussion. So that's my suggestion for whatever it's worth. And we will see, and we'll look forward to being back with you next Thursday.
So with that, thanks for everyone for tuning in, both our regular audience and also folks who may have tuned in with More Than the Score. Again, if you want to support us, just text USA Votes to 41444. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button to the UVA CFP YouTube channel, and we will be back next week. Thank you.